God, you look just like my brother. Only we buried him 25 years ago." The storm tore across the sky above O'Hare, and in the dead, cold flash of lightning, I saw in the rear-view mirror not just a passenger, but my own reflection, distorted by terror, which had suddenly spoken to me in a stranger's voice. The man in the expensive cashmere coat, pale as a sheet, was pressed into the leather seat, whispering that fatal sentence while looking straight into my eyes. In that second, the wipers squeaked across the glass, sweeping away not just the rain, but my entire fragile, hard-won life, exposing the black chasm beneath it, into which I was about to step. My name is Elias. Just Elias, with no middle name, because I don't remember one, and no last name that matters. The one written on my driver's license, Thorne, was given to me by the state in a hospital room, like a government-issued uniform. I've been living in my car for 3 months. My home is a beat-up Honda Civic with over 125,000 miles on it, saturated with the smell of cheap tobacco, gasoline, and sheer despair. My bathroom is the restroom at Shell stations, and sometimes, if I get lucky with fares, I can afford the shower at a roadside truck stop motel off of Interstate 80. I'm invisible. The city of Chicago, this concrete jungle, grinds up folks like me by the thousands, barely noticing the crunch of bones. Just 6 months ago, I was somebody. I had a life that would look good on any social media feed. A 2-bedroom condo with a mortgage in Hyde Park, a wife, Jada, who baked the best apple crisps in the world on Sundays, and 2 kids, Leah, who is 8, and Ronnie, who is 6, whose drawings covered our refrigerator. I ran a small construction firm called Midwest Home Builders. We built things honestly, with integrity, decks, custom homes, and vacation cabins. I wasn't rich, but I had solid ground beneath my feet. I was certain it would always be that way. And then everything came crashing down. The house of cards collapsed in 2 weeks, burying me in the debris. First, a general contractor stiffed us on a big project down near Joliet. We poured all our working capital into it. We bought materials on credit. My guys worked 7 days a week. And then the client company simply vanished, dissolved into offshore accounts, leaving us with multi-million-dollar debts. I tried to save the situation. I sold my wife's car and took out loans to pay the workers, men I had known for years, men I had broken bread and shared laughs with. But it wasn't enough. The banks, the collection agencies, the courts, everything started spinning out of control. Jada broke first. "How could you do this?" she screamed, stuffing clothes into a suitcase. Her face, usually so familiar and loving, was twisted with fear and rage. "You gambled away our future, Elias. You left your children without a roof over their heads. What were you thinking when you signed those papers?" I tried to explain the recession, the force majeure, and how every business hits a rough patch. But when it comes to the safety of their children, women become deaf to arguments. "I'm going to my mother's place in Joliet," she clipped, zipping up Ronnie's jacket. "Don't look for us until you get back on your feet. If you get back on your feet." The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in my empty chest. It was the sound of the final curtain. The bank took the condo, and the office was sealed. I was left alone with a city that suddenly felt cold and foreign. At first, I rented a room in a boarding house on the south side, where my neighbors threw loud parties every night. But when the money completely ran out and no one would hire me, who needs a 42-year-old bankrupt man with no permanent address and a ruined credit history, I ended up on the street. That's when I leased this Civic on a rent-to-own plan. The taxi company takes the lion's share of the fares, and the app takes its percentage. I'm left with just enough to fill the tank, buy a burrito near the train station, and set aside the few dollars for child support that I transfer to Jada with manic determination, as if it's the only thread connecting me to the world of the living. Sleeping in the car is rough. My neck aches, my knees hurt. In the winter, I have to run the engine every 2 hours, burning precious gas. In the summer, even with the windows down, the humidity and the mosquitoes coming off Lake Michigan eat me alive. I learned to sleep in 15-minute bursts between fares in the corners of mall parking lots, pulling my jacket over my head so passers-by wouldn't see my face. I became part of the urban landscape, a function, an extension of the steering wheel. Passengers got in, glued to their phones, muttered destinations like the Loop or Water Tower, and got out without looking at me. I was a phantom. But the morning I met Isaac started differently. I'd been staking out O'Hare since 4 in the morning. The rain was sheeting down, washing the grime from the Midwestern roads, turning the asphalt into a black mirror. There were no fares. I was sipping lukewarm vending machine coffee, watching planes slice through the low clouds, and thinking that next week was Ronnie's birthday. He'd be turning 7, and I had $30 in my pocket and half a tank of gas. The order came in suddenly. Comfort Plus. A ride downtown to a high-rise office building. I flinched. Usually, clients like that call for business class, and my life-battered Civic barely qualified for comfort, thanks only to the clean interior, the one thing I could still control in my life. I pulled up to the arrivals curb. A man in his early 40s stood under the awning. Expensive cashmere coat, leather briefcase, the confident posture of someone used to the world revolving around him. But there was a kind of nervousness in his movements. He kept checking his watch, frowning. "Good morning," I said, as he got in the back, folding his wet umbrella. "1 Prudential Plaza, please," he tossed out without looking up from his smartphone. "And hurry, if you can. I'm running late for a meeting." I nodded and smoothly pulled out, merging onto the highway. The rain drummed on the roof, creating a cozy cocoon of noise, cutting us off from the outside world. I glanced into the rearview mirror to check the road, and that's when our eyes met. Time stopped. I saw his pupils widen, saw the color drain from his face, leaving it gray, like ash. He dropped his phone. The expensive iPhone hit the floor mat with a muffled thud. "Oh God," he whispered, and there was so much pain in that whisper that chills ran down my spine. "You okay?" I asked, slowing down. "Do you need water, or should I pull over?" He didn't answer. He leaned forward, gripping the back of my seat so hard his knuckles turned white. His gaze searched my face, scanning every feature, my nose, my eyes, the scar on my chin. "It can't be," his voice trembled. "Turn around, please, turn around, and look at me." I flipped on the hazard lights and pulled to the shoulder. Fortunately, the highway had room. My heart was pounding in my throat. Is he crazy? Or did I cut someone off earlier, and this is a shakedown? I turned halfway toward him. "Look, man, if you don't want to go, what's your name?" He cut me off. The question sounded like a challenge. "Elias," I answered cautiously. "Last name?" "Thorne. Elias Thorne." What's going on? He leaned back in the seat and covered his eyes with his hand. His chest was heaving as if he'd just run a marathon. Thorn? No, that's not the name. But that face? He looked at me again, and tears welling up in his eyes. You look exactly like my brother, a spitting image, like my father when he was young. I tried to chuckle, but the sound was nervous. It happens. They say everyone has 7 lookalikes in the world. No, he shook his head. This isn't just a resemblance, it's a miracle. My brother, Avery, disappeared 25 years ago. He was 17. We looked for him everywhere. The police, psychics, volunteers. And then they told us they found a body. The words hung in the air, heavy and sticky. I felt a chill creep up the back of my neck. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Losing a brother is terrible. It's not the losing that's terrible. He looked out the window, where the gray Midwestern clouds snagged the tops of the pine trees. It's living with the thought that we might have been wrong. The casket was closed. They wouldn't let my mother identify him. My father just started drinking after the funeral. And I always felt that something was wrong, that he was still out there. He fixed his gaze on me again. How old are you, Elias? 42? The passenger's face twitched. Avery would be 42 this year, in October. My birthday's in November, I lied. Well, not entirely a lie. My license said November 15th, the day I was released from that damn hospital near Gary, Indiana, with a diagnosis of retrograde amnesia and a blank slate instead of a memory. November, he narrowed his eyes. Do you remember your childhood, Elias? School? Your first bicycle? The question hit the sorest spot. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I hated these questions. I had learned to deflect them, to invent stories about growing up on a farm, or a fire that destroyed all the photo albums. But now, looking into the eyes of this stranger, I couldn't lie. No, I breathed out. I don't remember. I was in an accident 25 years ago. A head injury. The doctor said my memory was wiped clean. I woke up in a county hospital with no ID, no name. No one was looking for me. The police checked their databases. Nothing. They said I was probably a transient, or a fugitive since no one claimed me. They gave me new documents, and here I am. The silence in the car became deafening. The only sounds were the rain hitting the roof and the pounding of my own heart. The passenger, whose name I learned a minute later was Isaac, slowly took out his wallet. With trembling fingers, he pulled out an old, worn, black and white photograph, the corner of which was torn. Look. He handed the photo to me. I took the card. In it, against the backdrop of an old pickup truck and a wooden cabin, stood 2 boys. The older one, serious, wearing glasses. The younger one, tousle-haired, with a wide grin and scraped knees. I looked at the younger boy and felt the ground drop out from under me. It was me. Not just a similar-looking boy. It was me, the same cut of the eyes, the same silly habit of squinting in the sun, the same scar above the eyebrow. I automatically touched my own forehead, where the old mark still felt bumpy beneath the skin. My voice wouldn't cooperate. Oh, where did you get my photo? It's not your photo, Elias, Isaac said softly. It's me and my brother, Avery. Summer of '98, the cabin near Joliet. The world tilted. The drumming rain turned into a roar. A ringing started in my ears. This is impossible, I whispered. You said you buried him. Then we buried the wrong man. Steel cut through Isaac's voice. "And you're alive. God, you're alive." He suddenly grabbed my hand. His palm was hot and damp. Avery had a birthmark on his left shoulder in the shape of a crescent moon. I froze. The air caught in my lungs. Slowly, as if in a dream, I pulled the collar of my worn sweatshirt down, exposing my left shoulder. Isaac leaned closer, and I heard him gasp. "The crescent," he whispered. "Mom used to call it the moon's kiss." We sat on the shoulder of the O'Hare Highway connector. Two grown men, battered by life, looking at each other through a blur of tears and rain. Cars whizzed past us, semis splashed us with dirty water. Someone honked, but for us the world had shrunk to the size of the inside of that old Civic. "I looked for you," Isaac said, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I looked for you half my life, even when everyone told me I was crazy. Even when my wife left, saying I was married to a ghost. I knew. I felt it." He took out a phone. Not the expensive one he dropped, but a simpler one. "Let's go," he said firmly. "To hell with the meeting. Let's go to a clinic. We'll do a DNA test right now. I have to know for sure." "I don't have money for a DNA test," I answered automatically, remembering my $30. "I have it." He gave a wry smile, and in that smile, I suddenly saw my own reflection. "We have it. Let's go, brother." I shifted into drive. My hands were shaking, but strangely, a sense of calm settled over me. It was like a puzzle piece that had been lying under the table for 25 years had finally clicked into place. I turned the wheel sharply, making a U-turn across the solid line. To hell with the ticket. To hell with everything. And I hit the gas. Ahead was the city, the rain, and the unknown. But for the first time, in those dreadful 3 months, I wasn't driving into emptiness. I was driving home, though I didn't yet know where that home was. The rain stopped being just weather. It became the backdrop, washing away the boundaries between reality and delusion. We drove to a private medical center on Dearborn Street, in the heart of downtown Chicago. Isaac was silent the entire way, but it wasn't the oppressive silence that hangs between strangers. It was a stillness, taut as a high-voltage wire. I felt him sneaking glances at me, and each look was like a touch on an exposed nerve. The Civic sputtered, bumping over the trolley tracks on Michigan Avenue. I looked down at my hands gripping the wheel, the hands of a 42-year-old man, calloused from construction, with grime ground into the pores that no soap could touch. Next to me sat a man whose hands only knew the leather steering wheel of a Mercedes and the smooth screen of a smartphone. And this man claimed we were blood. We parked near the medical center. The building of glass and steel looked back at us with 100 reflections. I caught myself feeling ashamed of my threadbare jacket, bought 3 years ago at a clearance sale, of my worn-out jeans, of the smell of cheap vending machine coffee that permeated the car. "Let's go," Isaac said, stepping out into the damp street without an umbrella. He didn't care about his suit. The reception area was quiet and smelled of money and sterility. The young woman at the desk raised a slight eyebrow when she saw us. The contrast was striking. A polished businessman and a scruffy cab driver. "We need an emergency DNA test." Isaac's voice was firm, though I could hear the tremor in it. "A kinship test. A full sibling study." "Certainly," the woman tapped on her keyboard. "Licenses, please." I pulled out my license. The plastic was worn thin. Thorn, Elias. Isaac placed his next to mine. Vance, Isaac S. We gave our samples in solemn silence. When the nurse swabbed the inside of my cheek, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if I was handing over not just epithelial cells, but a fragment of my messy, broken life, hoping to get a new one in return. The results will be ready in 3 days, the administrator said. We'll send a notification to your email. Isaac rubbed his temples. Fine. Good. We stepped out onto the porch. The rain had ended, leaving behind a penetrating, damp cold. Where are you staying? Isaac asked, seeing me shiver in the wind. In the car, I answered simply. There was no point in lying. He saw everything anyway. Isaac swore, a dirty, ugly, guttural curse. That's not happening. Let's go. Where? I tensed up. Listen, I'm not begging. I work. I have a plan. To hell with your plan, he cut me off. In his voice, I heard the same commanding tone that I, without realizing it, used to use on a job site. You're my brother, even if this damn test says otherwise. I'm not leaving a man who looks like Avery to sleep in a car in October. We drove to the hotel. I'd never been inside, only driven passengers there. Isaac rented a suite on the 40th floor. When we walked in, I froze. The panoramic windows opened up a view of the entire city. Chicago lay beneath me, wet, gray, but astonishingly beautiful. The lake, the skyline, the lights, everything was laid out before me. I felt like an imposter, having slipped into someone else's life. The shower is through there. Isaac gestured toward a glass door. Clothes. Listen, I'm going to order some delivery. What size do you wear? 42? Long? I managed to stammer out. I stood under the hot streams of water for 20 minutes, washing away the fatigue, the fear, the humiliation of the past months. I watched the dirty water disappear down the drain and thought, what if this is true? What if I'm Avery Vance? What if I have a history that started not in a hospital room 25 years ago, but much earlier? When I came out, a fresh pair of jeans and a sweater lay on the bed. Simple, good quality clothes. Food will be here in half an hour, Isaac said. He was sitting in an armchair by the window, swirling a glass of water. Sit down, tell me everything. And I told him. For the first time in years, I spoke the truth. Not the sanitized version for employers and casual acquaintances, but the real, prickly truth. I told him about the hospital in Gary, Indiana, how I woke up in a white room with a throbbing head and absolute emptiness inside. The doctors called it retrograde amnesia. A weary, heavy-faced police detective came 3 times. They found you on the side of the road, kid. No ID. No one's looking for you. Try to remember something. A city, a street. But I couldn't. Only fragments. The glare of headlights, the shriek of brakes, the smell of wet asphalt, and someone screaming, and a sensation of flying, a terrifying, unnatural flight into the darkness. They named me Elias because they found me on the highway on a Sunday, Imby said, looking at the city lights. And the nurse gave me the last name Thorn. She said, "You'll be a tough thorn, since you have no one else." Isaac listened without interrupting. His face was in shadow, but I saw him clenching the armrests of the chair. "And then?" he asked quietly. "Then the group home. They estimated my age at 17, based on my teeth and bones. I was a giant there. It was rough. I had to learn to fight so I wouldn't get eaten alive. Then community college, then construction. I took any job I could get. I felt that if I built homes for other people, maybe I'd get one of my own. And I did. But I couldn't hold on to it. You're not to blame, Isaac said firmly. You survived. You built yourself up from scratch, without memory, without support. You are incredibly strong, Avery. Elias, I corrected. For now, Elias. He nodded, accepting the rules of the game. All right, Elias, now listen to my story. Isaac stood up and walked to the window. His silhouette was sharply outlined against the night sky. Dad was an engineer at a plant. Mom taught music. We lived in a normal 3-bedroom home on the north side. You, Avery, were the life of the party, played the guitar. Girls chased you in droves. I was the younger one, the bookworm, always with my head in a book. You always protected me. He paused, collecting his thoughts. That day, October 4th, 2000. You had a fight with Dad over something stupid. I don't even remember what. You slammed the door and left. You said you were going to walk to a friend's place to cool off. And you never came back. Isaac turned to me. There was pain in his eyes, an old pain, like a chronic disease. We looked. God, how we looked. Mom turned gray in a month. Dad sold his truck, the cabin, hired private investigators. But it was a dead end. And 6 months later, they found a body in a wooded area near Joliet, badly decomposed. They identified it by the clothing. The jacket looked similar, and the height. DNA was slow and expensive back then, and the detective convinced Dad that it was definitely you, just to close the cold case. He paused, as if the words required physical effort. We buried an empty casket. I mean, there was a body there, but I stood at the grave and felt nothing, just emptiness. My parents, they never recovered. Mom passed away 3 years later. Her heart. Dad held on longer, but he just faded. He was always waiting for you to walk through the door. I listened, and something inside me began to thaw. The icy crust that had bound my soul for a quarter century cracked. The images painted by his words caused a strange echo. A piano. I remembered the sound of a piano. An old, slightly out-of-tune piano on which someone played scales. Moonlight Sonata, I whispered. Isaac flinched. What? Mom. She used to play Moonlight Sonata in the evenings when it snowed outside. Isaac collapsed into the chair and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. I sat there, stunned by my own memory, which had suddenly decided to wake up from a single word. Yes, Isaac's voice was muffled. She played Beethoven. You always asked her to play it when you were sad. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, the food delivery. That mundane sound brought us back to reality. But reality had already changed, irreversibly. We ate in silence, but it was the silence of two people who had just walked through a minefield and survived. Tomorrow, Isaac said, pushing his plate away. Tomorrow we go see the investigator. I hired a private detective 6 months ago when I had a dream that you were alive. Her name is Ms. Shaw. She's a former homicide detective. She's been digging relentlessly. If anyone can find the threads of that accident, it's her. Why? I asked. If I'm here, why stir up the past? Because I want to know who did this. Isaac's eyes darkened. Who hit you and left you to die on the side of the road like a dog? Who stole 25 years of our lives? And that person will answer for it. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. There, against the lights of nighttime Chicago, I saw not just a failed taxi driver. I saw a man whose life had been stolen and who was finally ready to take it back. "All right," I said, "let's go." Isaac nodded, and for the first time of that evening, he smiled. A genuine, warm smile. "Get some sleep, brother. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I lay down in the clean, crisp bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there listening to the hum of the big city, thinking that somewhere out in the suburbs, my children, Leah and Ronnie, were sleeping. And maybe, soon, they would have not only a father, but an uncle, and a family history that wouldn't be shameful to tell. The 3 days of waiting turned into an endless, sticky torture. Time didn't move. It crawled, leaving a trail of sticky doubt. Isaac insisted I stay at the hotel. "You need to rest, Elias. Get yourself together." But how could I get myself together when my entire reality was cracking at the seams, threatening to fall apart? I sat by the 40th floor window for hours, watching the ant-like chains of cars crawling below. My Civic was in the paid parking lot beneath the building, a small yellow dot, a symbol of my past life. I didn't go down to it. I was afraid that if I got behind the wheel, I would automatically start the engine and drive away. Drive back to my understandable, albeit miserable, existence, where there were no millionaire brothers, no ghosts from the past, and no hope that could turn out to be false. Isaac visited every evening. He brought food from restaurants whose names I had only seen in magazines. Marble beef steaks, complicated salads with arugula, which I hated. We ate, and he talked eagerly, breathlessly, as if afraid I would disappear. He told me about our childhood, about how we used to steal apples from orchards by the river, how I taught him to swim in a local pond, and he almost drowned, and I pulled him out by his hair, how we fought with the kids from the next block behind the garages. I listened, and sometimes sparks would flare up in my head. The smell of burning leaves, the taste of a sour apple, the feel of a stranger's hand clutching my wet hair. "Remember," he asked on the second day, "how Dad gave us one Nintendo console to share? You said it was mine because you were already grown up. You were 15. I closed my eyes. Gray plastic, an orange light gun, think of battles. "We fought over the joystick," I whispered. "You broke it." Isaac froze, with a fork in his hand. "I never told you about the joystick." We looked at each other. In his eyes, I saw such a desperate light of hope that it hurt. But there were other moments when I felt like an imposter, when he spoke of things I didn't remember, and my memory was silent as a dead phone line. "Mom loved to bake blueberry pie," he would say. Silence. No response, only the scent of the cheap pine air freshener in my memory. "You had a dog, a reddish-brown spaniel named Buddy." Emptiness. I didn't remember Buddy or the blueberry pie. In those moments, Isaac's light would dim. He'd look away, and I could read the fear in his posture. What if I'm wrong? What if this is just a coincidence, a cruel trick of genetics? On the third day, the email arrived. It was early morning. The city was still asleep under a gray blanket of smog. Isaac's phone chimed, a short, sharp notification sound that went off like a gunshot in the quiet room. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed. I hadn't slept all night. Isaac picked up the phone. His hands were shaking so hard, he almost dropped the device. "It's here," he said hoarsely. "From the lab." I stood up, my legs like cotton. "Open it," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. He pressed the email icon. The screen glowed brighter. He was silent for a second, then two, an eternity. I could hear my heart beating, a dull, heavy thudding in my temples. Isaac raised his eyes to mine. There were tears in them. Not the tight, controlled tears I'd seen in the car. These were the tears of a man who had just received forgiveness for a sin he hadn't committed. 99.99%, he whispered. Probability of kinship, full siblings. He threw the phone onto the bed and strode towards me. I didn't have time to say anything before he wrapped his arms around me, hugging me tightly until my ribs creaked. The way you hug someone returned from war, the way you hug the resurrected. "You're my brother," he whispered into my shoulder. "You're my brother, Avery. God, you're my brother." I stood there, my hands awkwardly down by my sides, stunned by this sudden intimacy. And then something inside me broke. The dam burst. I raised my arms and hugged him back. I smelled his expensive cologne, the scent of his fear, and his love. And for the first time in 25 years, I felt that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't just subject number 15 in a ward, not Citizen Thorne at the DMV, not a driver for faceless passengers. I was Avery Vance. I had a brother. I had a past. All right. I patted his back, feeling my eyes sting. "You're gonna choke me." Isaac pulled back, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. He was laughing, tears streaming down his cheeks. "We need a drink," he said. "Damn it, we need to get drunk." "It's morning," I chuckled. "In the morning? Today we can. Today is our second birthday." We didn't get drunk. Instead, we sat and stared at the electronic report on the phone screen like it was scripture. Lines of numbers, graphs, alleles. The dry science confirmed what the blood knew from the very beginning. "What now?" I asked, when the first wave of euphoria subsided. Isaac became serious. He was once again the businessman, solving problems. "Now we get your name back. I've already called the lawyers. It won't be easy, considering you're officially dead. We'll have to exhume that other guy's body. We'll have to sue the county clerk's office. But we'll do it." He paused. "And money. Our parents left an estate. The condo, the cabin, the accounts. I saved everything. I never touched a penny of your share. Half of everything I have is yours." I shook my head. "I don't want your money, Isaac. It's not my money." He pounded his fist on the table. "It's our money, from Mom and Dad. They worked their whole lives for us. And you'll take it. Don't argue. You'll pay off your debts, buy a place, and help your kids. Speaking of kids, when do we go see them?" I flinched. "Leah and Ronnie." "I don't know," I said honestly. "Jada, she probably won't be happy to see me, especially with this insane story. She'll think I've finally gone crazy from grief and being broke." "I don't care what she thinks," Isaac said harshly. "She doesn't have the right to deprive those children of their father and their uncle. Get ready. We're driving to Joliet right now, in my car. Let your Civic sit here. You're not a cab driver anymore, Avery. You're coming home." We went down to the underground parking garage. Isaac led me to a huge black SUV. "Get in." He tossed me the keys. I was taken aback. "Me, drive this tank? You're a better driver than I am. You're the professional." My hands are shaking. I got behind the wheel. The leather seat hugged me. The dashboard glowed with a soft light. The engine purred, deep and powerful. I put my hands on the steering wheel and felt a strange confidence. We headed out onto the highway. The road stretched out beneath the wheels, a gray ribbon leading west. Isaac was silent, looking out the window, but this time it was a comfortable silence. "You know," he said suddenly, as we passed a highway sign, "I always hated this spot." "Why?" "Because they found your jacket in the woods here, 100 yards off the road." I slowed down. The woods stood like a wall, somber and autumnal, keeping their secrets. "We'll find who did this," I said, surprised at the coldness in my own voice. "I promise. But first, the family." Jolie Elliott greeted us with the smoke from factory stacks and the broken streets of the older residential area. I remembered my mother-in-law's address, a cinder block house with a green fence. I stopped the SUV at the gate. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. "Go on," Isaac said. "I'll wait here. This is your fight." I got out of the car. The gate squeaked, just like in my nightmares. A dog barked in the yard. Jada came out onto the porch in an old puffy coat, a bucket in her hands. She saw me, saw the expensive car behind me, and the bucket fell from her hands, clattering down the wooden steps. "Elias?" Her voice trembled. "Hi, Jada," I said. "We need to talk and meet my brother." Isaac got out of the car and stood next to me. We stood shoulder to shoulder, two copies, separated by time and fate, but now united. Jada looked at us, switching her gaze from one to the other, her eyes widening in shock. "My God," she whispered. "You're identical." Then Leah ran out onto the porch. "Daddy!" she screamed, ignoring the strange uncle and the weird tension. "Daddy came!" She ran to me, and I swept her into my arms, burying my face in her fluffy hair, which smelled of children's shampoo and the wind. In that moment, I understood. It didn't matter what last name was on my license. It didn't matter how much money I had. What mattered was that I was here, and I wasn't going to disappear again. The conversation with Jada lasted 3 hours. We sat in her mother's kitchen, drinking strong tea, and I told a story that sounded like the rambling of a lunatic. DNA test, amnesia, a millionaire brother, 25 lost years. Jada listened, shaking her head, switching her gaze from me to Isaac, who remained silent, confirming my words simply by his presence. We really did look alike. Not just similar, but cut from the same cloth. Only life had polished us differently. "It's impossible," Jada kept repeating. But there was no anger in her voice anymore, only confusion and something else. Maybe relief. "Elias? Avery. Damn it, what should I call you?" "Elias? For now," I said. "I'll get used to the other name gradually." "So, you weren't to blame." She looked at her hands clutching the mug. "For the bankruptcy, for the ruin. You weren't an irresponsible fool. You just didn't know who you were. You had no roots, no support." "I still messed up," I admitted honestly, with or without roots. "But now I have a chance to fix things." Leah and Ronnie wouldn't leave our sides. Kids smell a lie from a mile away, but they weren't smelling one now. Ronnie sat on my lap, tugging at my arm, occasionally looking into my eyes as if checking, "You're not going to disappear, are you?" Leah clung to Isaac's neck. He clearly didn't know how to handle children, but he tried his best, telling her about his office and the robot vacuum cleaner. "Uncle Isaac," Leah asked seriously, "are you really my daddy's brother?" I am, Isaac smiled. I'm your uncle, and I promise I'll visit often now, very often. With presents? Practical Ronnie clarified. With presents, Isaac laughed. Absolutely. When the kids went outside to play, Jada spoke softly. What's going to happen now? With us, with the child support, with everything. I wanted to see the kids, I said firmly. Every weekend. As for the money, I glanced at Isaac. He nodded. I'll clear all the debts, I continued, and I'll transfer a decent amount for the children so they don't want for anything. Jada covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. I reached out a hand but didn't touch her. We were already strangers, close strangers, connected only by the two beautiful children now playing in the yard. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not abandoning them completely. I never would, I said, and it was the truth. A week later, we were sitting in Detective Shaw's office. She was a woman in her 50s with a short gray haircut and the keen gaze of a bird of prey. Her office smelled of coffee and cold cases. All right, Gentleman Vance, she said, laying a thick folder in front of us. I dug deep, and what I found, you won't like. Isaac tensed up beside me. Tell us. Ms. Shaw pulled out an old photocopy of a police report. October 4th, 2000. Highway near Joliet. Mile marker 17. Unidentified juvenile found unconscious. Multiple injuries. Head trauma. No driver. No car. Only skid marks and shattered glass in the ditch. Who found him? I asked, my throat tight. A truck driver named Calvin Hicks. He died in 2018. But I found his statement. He said he saw a light-colored sedan on the shoulder that suddenly sped away when he started to slow down. He didn't catch the license plate or the make. It was dark. Isaac slammed his fist on the desk. And the cops just left it at that? Just wrote it off? Not exactly. Ms. Shaw flipped the page. A case was opened, but the investigation was sloppy. Interstate confusion. They were looking for you in Chicago, but you were found in the Gary, Indiana area. Databases weren't connected back then. Avery was listed as John Doe. The case was closed after 1 year. So the driver was never found? I felt my rage boiling. 25 years. That person lived in peace for 25 years, knowing he left a teenager to die. Ms. Shaw paused. Not entirely. I pulled all the accidents in that area in October 2000 and found something interesting. 3 days after your incident, a local resident, Dr. Charles Victor Brenner, 52 years old, reported his car stolen. A light-colored Toyota Camry. Isaac straightened up. And the car was found a week later, crashed and burned in a wooded area near the state line. Forensics showed signs of a prior accident, but Dr. Brenner claimed the car was stolen right from his driveway. His alibi was ironclad. He was on duty at the hospital. He worked as an anesthesiologist at Metropolitan General. A doctor? I whispered. A doctor hit me and left. Ms. Shaw nodded. I can't say for sure, but there are too many coincidences. Light sedan, time, location. Furthermore, I found an interesting detail. Brenner was indeed on duty that night, from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. The sign-in log shows he left between 11 and midnight. Emergency call is written next to the time. What kind of call? No data. No ambulance left the hospital that night. I checked every hospital in the area. A fake entry to cover his absence. Isaac stared at the photo in the file. Charles Brenner, a plump man in glasses with a kind, friendly face. A killer with the face of a family doctor. Where is he now? Isaac's voice was cold as ice. Ms. Shaw sighed. He died 3 years ago. Lung cancer. But he left a son, Miles Brenner, 39, living here in Chicago. And here's what's interesting. 2 years ago, he went to the police to confess. He wanted to talk about that accident, but the case was already closed. The statute of limitations had run out. And most importantly, there was no victim. He knows. I jumped up. He knows what happened. Yes. And I think he'll want to talk to you. Miles Brenner lived in a worn apartment building on the south side. We went 3 of us, I, Isaac, and Mr. Shaw. Isaac insisted he be there. I've been looking for the truth for 25 years. I have a right to hear it. A thin man with sunken cheeks and tired eyes opened the door. He looked at me, and I saw him flinch. You? He stepped back. My God, you're alive? Alive, I said harshly. Unlike the person your father left to die on the side of the road. Miles covered his face with his hands. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. I know. I've known for 3 years. Before he died, Dad told me everything. It ate him up inside, worse than the cancer. We walked into the apartment. It was ascetic, as if a monk lived there, not an ordinary city clerk. Miles made tea, which we didn't drink, and began to speak. Dad was driving home after his shift. He lied in the log. He wasn't there because he was visiting his mistress in Joliet. He was having an affair. He was always the model family man, and then he just snapped. Mom never knew. He took a gulp from his cup. He had a couple of drinks at his mistress's house. On the way back, he saw you on the shoulder. Thinking you were hitchhiking, he stopped and offered you a ride. You got in. He said you were a decent kid, polite, talking about football. I listened, and fragments rose inside me. A soft seat, the smell of leather and cologne, a voice talking about the Bears. What happened next? Isaac asked hoarsely. Dad lost control of the car, not because of the alcohol. He just hydroplaned on a curve, ice. The car spun out and hit the shoulder. Dad was thrown out the door. He only had bruises, but you hit your head on the pillar. Badly. Blood. Dad tried to wake you up, but you were unconscious. Miles paused, steeling himself. Then he panicked. He was afraid he would lose his career, his family, his freedom, that the affair and the drinking and driving would come out. He left you there, called a cab, and drove away. The next day, he reported the car stolen and burned it. The silence in the room was deafening. I sat with my fists clenched, my nails digging into my palms. He killed me, I whispered. He killed Avery Vance, the boy who loved the guitar and protected his younger brother. He turned me into a nobody. Miles looked at me, tears streaming down his face. A lifetime wouldn't be enough for me to apologize. I begged Dad to turn himself in every day for the last 3 years of his life, but he was afraid. And then he died without ever finding the courage. And you tried to confess yourself, Mrs. Shaw said, after his death. Yes, but they told me the case was closed. The victim never came forward. The statute of limitations had passed. That my confession was just words. Nothing would change. Isaac stood up. I thought he was going to hit Miles, but he just walked to the window and stood there, looking out at the gray south side streets. There won't be justice, he said quietly. Your father is dead. The case won't be reopened, and my brother won't be given back to me. I know. Miles lowered his head. But if you want, I'm ready to do anything. A public confession, compensation, whatever. My father took your life. The least I can do is help you get it back." I looked at this man, broken by a sin that wasn't his. He wasn't guilty, but he carried the cross of his father's crime. "I don't need compensation," I said. "I need one thing. I want you to tell this story publicly. In the newspaper, online, wherever, so people know what cowardice looks like and what it leads to." Miles nodded. I'll do it. I promise." We stepped outside. Evening was falling. The lights of the south side were coming on, one by one, turning the neighborhood into a constellation. "Is that it?" Isaac asked. "We learned the truth, and that's all?" "No," I shook my head. "This is the beginning of the end of my ghostly existence. Now I know who I am, and I won't let that go to waste." We got in the car. Isaac started the engine but didn't move. "Avery? Or Elias, damn it. Brother, what are you going to do now?" I looked at him. "My brother, my blood, my family." "Live," I said simply. "I'm finally going to live." It turned out that living was harder than surviving. When you're surviving, you have one clear goal: make it to tomorrow. Don't starve. Don't freeze in the car. Don't drown in debt and shame. When you suddenly surface from that swamp and find yourself on solid ground, the familiar quicksand isn't there, and it's terrifying. The next few months turned into a marathon of office visits. I had never been to the DMV, the county clerk's office, the courts, and other places where a person's fate is measured by forms, stamps, and signatures. So many times in my life. Isaac was with me through all of it, like a guide through bureaucratic hell. "First, we need official recognition that you didn't die," said the lawyer, a thin man in glasses named Mr. Sterling. His voice held an almost academic boredom. "To do that, we'll have to exhume the body listed as Avery Vance." I flinched inside. "There's someone there," I managed to say. "There's a man who was mistakenly buried under your name," Mr. Sterling replied calmly. "We will establish his identity, if we can. Justice is an expensive commodity." The procedure was long and morbid. I didn't go to the cemetery when they opened the grave where a headstone with my name had stood for over 20 years. It was enough to know that somewhere in the cold ground lay a young man who was even less fortunate than I was. The DNA test confirmed the obvious. The person buried under my name was someone else, a John Doe, whom the police in the early 2000s simply attached to our case to close a cold one. They found distant relatives for him through a database somewhere out near Aurora, and they, stunned, agreed to put the man's real name on his grave. My name was free. The court hearing in the Chicago District Court was about recognizing me as alive. The phrasing sounded absurd, but official. On the cancellation of the death certificate and the restoration of the birth certificate. The judge, a woman with a tired face, peered at the documents for a long time. The DNA results, expert conclusions, Isaac's testimony, records from the hospital in Gary, from the group home. "Do you understand?" she said, looking over her glasses. "Legally, you currently exist in two persons, as Elias Thorne and as the deceased Avery Vance." "Yes," I answered. "I've lived in two persons my whole life." The courtroom was silent. Isaac sat next to me, his lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Sterling slid another paper to the judge. "The court, having reviewed the case materials, decrees, the judge began. And in that moment, a strange feeling washed over me. It was as if they weren't just resolving a bureaucratic issue, but returning me to the world. As if before this, I had lived in a rough draft, and now they were neatly copying me into the final version. The death certificate of Avery S. Vance, dated April 4th, 2001, is hereby canceled. It is established as fact that Avery S. Vance is alive. My heart skipped a beat. Of course, I knew all this before the court, but only when I heard those words did I feel the invisible slab that had been pressing me to the ground lift away. I looked up at Isaac. He was smiling, and in that smile was everything. Relief, joy, the fatigue of a long journey. We shook hands like two men signing a peace treaty after a long war. The next step was changing my ID. At the DMV on the south side, I sat in line among seniors, students, and other tired men like me. I had a ticket with the number A203 and a pile of documents, a birth certificate, the court order, and my old Thorn license. Purpose of visit? The clerk asked without looking up. Change of name. Name change. She nodded. As I filled out the application, I paused for a second above the name and surname line. My hand trembled slightly. Vance, Avery S. I stared at those letters as if seeing them for the first time, and at the same time, as if I had always known them by heart. Something clicked inside, like a door that had been ajar finally swinging wide open. A month later, when I held the brand new ink-smelling ID in my hands, with the eagle shining on the cover, and the name Vance, Avery S. next to my weary-eyed photo, I wanted to cry like a child. Not from weakness, but because the bones had finally clicked into place. I had gotten myself back. The money arrived unexpectedly calmly. There were no dramatic scenes at the bank, no security guards counting stacks of bills. There were simply figures on my phone screen that suddenly stopped being embarrassingly small. Isaac transferred my share of the inheritance from our parents. Some of the funds were in a savings account and some in shares of a manufacturing company that I had never heard of. Isaac hadn't touched it all those years. I couldn't, he confessed, as we sat in the kitchen of his luxury apartment and looked at the numbers. It was the family's money. Our family's. I always knew it wasn't just mine. You could have spent it, I said. I could have, he nodded. But then I would have betrayed you completely. In addition to the inheritance, there was another financial piece. The insurance company that had once covered Brenner, after his son's public confession and the media frenzy, agreed to an out-of-court settlement. The lawyer skillfully cornered them, and another large sum landed in my account as compensation for emotional distress and lost opportunities. I looked at the money and felt no joy. Money couldn't bring back my youth, the stolen years, the unplayed songs on the guitar, the unlearned lessons, the missed first year of college. But it could give me something I never had: choice. What are you going to do? Isaac asked. Buy a flashier car? A condo downtown? I shook my head. A condo? Yes, I said. But not downtown. A normal, decent one, where the kids have a room. And what else? I thought back to the people I had met while sleeping in my car, at the rest stops, in the parking lots near the mall, at the gas stations outside Indianapolis. The men who had lost their jobs and were living in their vans. The woman who slept with her child in an all-night diner because her drunken husband was waiting for her at home. The kid with the backpack who had run away from a group home, much like the one I had ended up in. I want Ninon to help people like us, I said, those who have fallen out of life, who are on the roadside, like I was on that highway. Isaac watched me intently. You want to start a foundation? I don't know what you call it, I admitted honestly, but I want to create a place where a person can go when everything has collapsed, where they can get help, not just with a meal and a mattress, but with paperwork, a job, and a counselor. Isaac smiled. You'd make a pretty good social project director. I make a pretty good person, I replied. And that's saying something. We found a condo quickly. A 2-bedroom on the north side in an older brick building from the late 80s. Not a new complex with a parking garage and a concierge, but a home with trees outside the windows and normal neighbors, not empty investment units. When I walked inside for the first time as the owner, not a renter, something inside me stirred. Off-white walls, old but functional hardwood floors, a tiny kitchen with a gas stove and a view of the distant factory stacks. I ran my hand along the wall like the bark of a tree and felt the roughness of life beneath my fingers. This will be Leah's room, I said, entering the bright corner room. She likes a lot of light. And this one is Ronnie's, smaller, but with the nook for his bed. I bought them new beds, desks, and bookshelves. Jada initially resisted the idea of letting the children stay overnight, but then she gave in, seeing the care with which I prepared everything. Pain for the past still lingered in her eyes, but a small space for trust was beginning to open. The first night Leah and Ronnie stayed with me, I barely slept. I sat in the kitchen, drinking chamomile tea and listening to their breathing from the children's room. Every breath was proof that I wasn't dreaming. Daddy? Leah came out to the kitchen in her unicorn pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Why are you awake? What if this is a dream? I confessed. I'm afraid of waking up. She climbed onto my lap, just as she used to 5 years ago when we all lived in Hyde Park. If it were a dream, she said wisely, you'd be young and handsome. I burst out laughing. Thanks, daughter, I said. Very supportive. I'm serious. You're real. You have wrinkles. There are no wrinkles in dreams. I hugged her tight, feeling my chest constrict with love and gratitude for the fact that despite everything, I could still sit on an old stool in the kitchen and hold my daughter in my arms. For the fact that life, no matter how cruel, still gives small but stubborn gifts. Our philanthropic project was born from a conversation in Isaac's kitchen. The three of us were there, Isaac, Ms. Shaw, and I. Yes, the same tough, dry-looking detective who, however, knew how to listen better than many counselors. I'm leaving private investigations, she said unexpectedly, pushing her coffee cup away. How much more of other people's dirt can I dig up? What will you do? Isaac asked. She looked at me. You, Avery, have a unique background, she said. You've been a victim, a nameless orphan, a man from the bottom, and a business owner. You know the system from both sides. I nodded. And you want to help people like yourself? Help people who have found themselves in a legal and human vacuum? She clarified. The only question is, are you ready to learn? I chuckled. I'm a 42-year-old cab driver with amnesia, I said. I think all I've ever done is learn. Then here's the thing. Ms. Shaw pulled a brochure from her bag. On the cover was written, State College of Chicago, continuing education program in social work. They have good courses for people over 35, she said. No SATs, just an interview. Are you serious? The idea of going back to school at my age seemed both ridiculous and daunting. I was used to being the one who knew everything, who made the decisions. And here I was, becoming a student, again, sitting in lectures, taking notes. But I remembered standing by the highway, crushed on the shoulder with my feet smeared on the asphalt. I remembered the nights in the car, the smell of gas and cheap tobacco. And I realized that nothing could be worse than that. I'll try, I said. No, you won't try, I corrected myself. I'll enroll. Isaac clapped me on the shoulder. If you need it. I'll study all that social pedagogy stuff with you, he said, even though I'm still allergic to textbooks. The admission process was easier than I expected. At the interview at the college, the committee, consisting of 3 professors, questioned me about my motivation. For a long time, I honestly told my story, not turning it into a melodrama, but not hiding the main points. They exchanged glances. You have something that many young students lack, one of them, a gray-haired woman with a soft voice, said. Life experience and an understanding of pain. We'll take you. When I stepped outside with the coveted paper that read, Enrolled in Professional Retraining Program, I felt like a kid after getting his first A. Isaac was waiting for me at the entrance, leaning against the car. He gave me a thumbs up. Well, student? He grinned. Ready to celebrate? Let's go. I nodded. But no drinking and driving. We both laughed. The laugh was a little hoarse, but there was no bitterness in it. Only relief. 6 months later, I woke up to the March sun streaming into my room. Above the neighborhood, the sky was pale, but determined, promising spring, even though the ground below was still muddy with melted snow. On the chair by the bed lay thick notes on social psychology and a notebook with the plan for our project. I stretched, heard my joints crack, and smiled. Someone was breathing softly behind the wall. Ronnie, who had insisted on staying until Monday because Daddy's macaroni is better. A careful clinking of dishes came from the kitchen. Leah was trying to make us breakfast. Life had settled into a strange but pleasant rhythm. On weekdays, I went to classes at the college, and in the evenings, I worked on the concept for our support center, Second Chance. That's what Isaac, Ms. Shaw, and I decided to call our project. On weekends, the kids came to stay, and we turned the condo into the headquarters of the universe. We built spaceships out of pillows, baked pancakes, and watched old movies. We decided to open the center in a former children's clinic building on the south side that the city had put up for lease. Old corridors with peeling paint, the faint smell of forgotten childhood tears. I walked through them, running my hand along the cool walls, imagining a different future for this place. The reception area will be here, I said, pointing to a spacious room with large windows. People will walk in not as if entering a government office, but a home, with armchairs, books, and a kids' corner. And here will be the legal counsel office, Miss Shaw added, whom we had asked to head the center's legal direction. We'll help them restore documents, fight for child support, and protect those who are used to being ignored. And over there, in the former treatment room, we'll make a therapist's office, Isaac chimed in. I could see the excitement in his eyes. In its own way, this project was important to him, too. For 25 years, he had lived in search mode. Now that I was found, he needed to direct that energy somewhere else. I'll invest the startup capital, he said. But after that, the center has to live on its own. Grants, donations, partners. We'll manage, I replied. In the beginning, I was embarrassed by my title. Director. The word felt foreign. Too big for me, right? But when the first woman, with a bruise under her eye and 2 children clinging to her legs, walked into our still-under-renovation hall, I stopped thinking about words. They told me you help, she said, not meeting my eyes. I recognized that voice. I had spoken like that myself once in a social worker's office. Come in, I said. We have tea, cookies, and time. Time is the most valuable thing you can give a person on the brink. We helped her. We documented her injuries, filed a report, and found a place for her in a crisis center. I watched her leave, holding her children's hands, and understood. Every person like her was a small victory over the night I was left on the roadside. My relationship with Jada changed. We didn't go back to what we had, and maybe that was right. We had both changed too much to play house, as if nothing had happened. But we became partners. Partners in the most important project of our lives, Leah and Ronnie. We went to parent-teacher conferences together. We chose sports teams and summer camps together. Sometimes Jada and I would sit in her mother's kitchen, drinking tea and talking about the past without shouting, about how young and foolish we were, about how fear and poverty make people cruel, even when they don't want to be. You know, she said one evening, looking out the window as the snow fell slowly, I hated you back then for losing everything. But now I understand that you were already stripped bare. I nodded. I didn't need excuses. It was enough that we could talk without the pain. You're different, she added. More real. Somehow. You think the role of the amnesiac cab driver suited me? I tried to joke. She smiled. The role of the father who came back suits you, she said. And that was the best review of my new life. On a warm May day, Isaac and I drove to the cemetery. I had put off the visit for a long time, but I knew that sooner or later I had to go there, not as a ghost, but as a son. We carried 2 carnations and a small jar of dirt from the yard of our old North Side home, which was now owned by strangers. The parents' grave was well kept. Isaac had come here alone all those years, keeping the stone clean, placing fresh flowers. Now we stood together before the gray stone engraved with their names and dates. Hi, I said, feeling awkward, like a boy coming home after staying out too late. It's me. The words caught in my throat. I know you thought I was gone, but I was just in a different place. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. Isaac was silent, but I felt his hand on my shoulder. The wind rustled the crowns of the old pine trees. Somewhere in the distance, someone was laughing. A family had come for a remembrance picnic with their children. You have 2 grandchildren, I said, suddenly realizing how strange that sounded. Leah and Ronnie, they're good kids, loud, funny, stubborn. I'm alive, I repeated, crouching down to run my fingers over the stone. Isaac found me. We're okay. I didn't wait for an answer, but at some point, a gust of wind brought me a familiar scent. The subtle fragrance of my mother's perfume, the one that sometimes surfaced in my dreams. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to believe it was a sign. Let's go, brother, Isaac said softly. The living are waiting for us. I stood up. We walked along the cemetery path and I felt light. Not because I had forgotten the pain, no, but because I had accepted it as a part of me. Like a scar that no longer bled, but reminded me of who I had been. That evening, We had dinner at my condo. Around the table were me, Isaac, Jada, the kids, and Ms. Shaw. On the stove, a hearty beef stew was simmering, based on Mom's recipe. Isaac had found it in an old notebook he had somehow kept all those years. "It's not like hers," he confessed, stirring the pot. "But I tried." "It's a great stew," Miss Shaw said, taking a spoonful. "For a man, it's a masterpiece." Leah and Ronnie argued over which adult had the funnier childhood stories. Jada told the one about how I once forgot Leah at daycare and arrived 2 hours late. Leah had started a strike with her teachers. Isaac shared how he was afraid of the dark as a kid and slept with the nightlight on. I listened to them and caught myself thinking, this is it, the home I never had in my conscious life. Not walls and square footage, not renovations and furniture, but the people who sit at one table and feel right together. "Daddy?" Ronnie suddenly asked, looking up from his bowl. "Who are you now, Elias or Avery?" The question was honest, straight and simple, like only a child can ask. Silence hung over the table for a second. I looked at him, then at Leah, Jada, and Isaac. "I'm your daddy," I said. "And his brother," I nodded toward Isaac. "All the other names are just letters on a piece of paper." "So, you're like a superhero with two identities?" Ronnie clarified. "More like an old Civic that got a new license plate, but the engine is still the same," Isaac chuckled. We laughed, and there wasn't a drop of bitterness in that laughter, only life. Ordinary human life, with its stew, its jokes, and its house slippers. Late that evening, after everyone had left, and the children were asleep in their room, I walked out onto the balcony. A few stars twinkled above the neighborhood, and cars rustled on the asphalt below. I leaned on the railing and looked down. My old Civic was parked near the entrance. I had bought it from the cab company, even though everyone said it was foolish. But for me, it wasn't just a car. It was the raft that kept me afloat until I was pulled out of the stormy sea. It was a reminder of the nights when I thought no one needed me, and the morning when a man got into my back seat, looked at me and said, "You look just like my brother." I took out my phone. A new text message from Isaac was flashing. "Thanks for being alive. I thought I was looking for a ghost for 25 years, he wrote. I smiled and typed a reply. "Thanks for finding the living." Then I muted the phone, put it in my pocket, and looked out at the night city one last time. Chicago hummed, glowed, and lived its life. I was no longer a shadow in it. I was a man with a past, a present, and most importantly, a future. And that future no longer frightened me. Sometimes the most important journeys don't start with where you're going, but with who gets into your back seat. And sometimes, to find yourself, you need to look into the rearview mirror one day and see they're not a tired cab driver, but a man who someone once loved very much and never stopped searching for. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.